In the autumn of 1943, Esther Goldstein, a 28-year-old Jewish teacher from Krakow, is deported to the Sobibor concentration camp along with her 8-year-old daughter Rebecca and hundreds of other Polish Jews. Brutally separated from her daughter upon arrival, Esther witnesses unimaginable horrors in the first days, until a desperate decision leads her to a survival strategy that will test the limits of human endurance. When a typhus epidemic spreads through the camp, Esther sees a macabre opportunity, pretending to be dead to escape the daily selections that send prisoners to the gas chambers. With the silent help of Dr. Samuel Rosen, a prisoner doctor who risks everything to keep her alive, and Anna Kowalski, a political prisoner who becomes her secret guardian, Esther embarks on an impossible 45-day journey between life and death. Hidden among piles of corpses, fed by stolen crumbs and sustained only by the hope of reuniting with Rebecca, Esther will discover that surviving is not just about keeping your heart beating, but about preserving your own humanity when the world around you has lost its own. I can still feel the weight of the bodies today. It's not a sensation you forget, the cold of lifeless skin, the stiffness that comes with hours, the silence that isn't peace, but total absence of hope.
45 days.
45 days pretending to be dead to stay alive. 45 days among corpses, counting breaths that no one could hear, memorizing the rhythm of German guards' boots passing by to check if any body was still moving. My name is Esther Goldstein. At 28, I taught literature to children at a Jewish school in Krakow. Rebecca, my daughter, sat in the front row every morning, not because she was my favorite, but because it was the only way I could concentrate knowing she was safe. Her blonde braids bounced when she laughed at the stories I told. She was 8 when they took us. October 1943. Golden autumn leaves covered Krakow's streets like a last beauty before the end of the world. I was preparing dinner when they knocked on the door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the sound of heavy fists against fragile wood, the sound every Jewish family had learned to fear. Rebecca was playing on the kitchen floor with a rag doll I had made for her the year before. When she heard the pounding, she looked at me with those enormous blue eyes she inherited from her father. "Mama." I knew what that knock meant. We all knew. Even so, part of me still hoped it was just someone asking to borrow sugar, or perhaps a letter that had been delivered to the wrong address. When I opened the door, 3 German soldiers completely filled the doorway. One of them, the youngest, had sweat stains on his forehead despite the cold. Another was chewing something, maybe bread, moving his jaw mechanically while his eyes scanned our small living room. "Esther Goldstein?" The voice was dry, professional. "Yes." "You have 10 minutes to take what you can carry. Leave the keys on the table." Rebecca hid behind my legs, gripping my skirt so tightly I could feel her small nails through the fabric. 10 minutes. How do you pack a lifetime in 10 minutes? How do you choose what to take when you don't know where you're going or if you'll return? I took the Bible that had been my mother's, some clothes, what little food we had. Rebecca insisted on taking the doll. I almost said no, that it was impractical, that we needed space for important things. But I looked at her face and realized that maybe the doll was the most important thing of all. The train was a moving metal prison. They crammed us into cattle cars, so many people we couldn't all sit at the same time. The smell was impossible to describe, sweat, urine, fear transformed into physical odor. Rebecca stayed glued to me during the entire journey, which lasted 2 days. She didn't cry. I think she was in shock, like all of us. Children have a strange capacity to accept the impossible when they can't comprehend it. I whispered stories in her ear during the journey. Adapted fairy tales where princesses always found their way home, where dragons were just shadows that dissolved in morning light. She smiled occasionally, and I pretended that was enough to keep the darkness away. Sobibor. Even today, pronouncing that name is like swallowing glass shards. When the car doors opened, the first thing I saw was barbed wire fence stretching as far as the eye could see. The second thing was guards with their dogs. The third was smoke coming from a direction I couldn't identify, but that carried a smell that made my stomach turn. Women to the left. Men to the right. Children under 12, follow the women. I grabbed Rebecca's hand and we started walking to the left, but a guard stopped us. "The child stays here." "She's only 8, sir. May I go with her?" "The child stays here." That was the last time I saw Rebecca. She looked at me over her shoulder as she was led away by a woman I didn't know, still holding the rag doll. Her lips formed the word mama, but no sound came out. I tried to run after her, but two women held me by the arms. "Don't do it," one of them whispered in my ear. "Don't do it if you want any chance of seeing her again." During the first days at Sobibor, I lived only for that possibility, seeing Rebecca again. I discovered she had been taken to a different section of the camp, where children stayed until, well, I didn't want to think about what happened after. Some women whispered that children were sent to lighter work camps. Others shook their heads silently when the subject came up. I worked sorting clothes. Mountains and mountains of clothes that arrived daily, still carrying the smell and warmth of those who had worn them. Children's dresses, men's overcoats, shoes too small for feet that no longer needed to walk. My job was to separate by size and condition, sending the best pieces to be reused by the Germans. It was on a Tuesday in November that I found the doll. It was in the middle of a pile of children's clothes, its cloth face smiling grotesquely amid so much silent despair. It was identical to the one I had made for Rebecca. Identical. Same hair color made of wool strands, same little blue dress I had sewn with scraps from my own clothing. For a moment, my heart stopped. Then it raced so fast I thought I would faint. I looked around. The guards were distracted, smoking near the fence. I hid the doll under my blouse and continued working, but my hands shook so much I could barely hold the clothes. When the whistle blew for the end of the workday, I walked back to the barracks like a sleepwalker. That night, I examined every detail of the doll in the weak light coming through a crack in the wall. It was hers. I was absolutely certain. The small tear in the left arm, where Rebecca had played too roughly once. The brown stain on the dress, from when she had spilled hot chocolate on the doll during a winter that now seemed to belong to another life. If the doll was there, Rebecca had gone through that clothes sorting process. If she had gone through that process, it meant she was no longer in the children's section. And if she was no longer in the children's section, it was that night that I made the decision that would define the next 45 days of my life. Typhus had begun spreading through the camp 2 weeks earlier. Men and women fell ill quickly, developing high fevers that made them delirious before dying. The Germans had a simple protocol for dealing with epidemics. Anyone showing symptoms was immediately relocated, a euphemism we all understood perfectly. But the dead weren't relocated immediately. Bodies were piled in an isolated section of the camp until there were enough trucks to take them for cremation. It was a matter of logistics. And in German logistics, I saw my only chance of survival. Dr. Samuel Rosen worked in the camp's improvised infirmary. He was in his 50s with graying hair that must once have been red, and hands that trembled constantly, not from fear, but from chronic hunger. Before the war, he had been one of Warsaw's most respected doctors. Now he spent his days trying to treat incurable diseases with expired aspirin and bandages made from rags. I approached him on a foggy morning, when visibility was low enough that we could talk without drawing attention. "Dr. Rosen, I need your help." He looked at me with suspicion. In the camp, requests for help usually meant trouble for both parties. "What do you want?" "I want you to declare me dead." He remained silent for a long moment, studying my face. Then he sighed deeply, as if he knew this conversation would come sooner or later. "Have you gone insane?" "Maybe. But it's the only way." I explained my plan. It was simultaneously simple and impossible. During one of the routine morning checks, I would simulate advanced typhus symptoms. Dr. Rosen would declare me dead and my body would be taken to the pile of corpses. There I would remain motionless during the day, breathing almost imperceptibly, waiting for darkness to move minimally, feed on any scraps I could find, and prepare to repeat everything the next day. "It's suicide," he said. "Staying alive here is also suicide. At least this way I choose how." Dr. Rosen stared at me for a long time. Then he looked around, making sure no one was paying attention to our conversation. "You'll need help. You can't do this alone." "I know. And you know that if we're discovered, all of us will be executed immediately." "I know." He nodded slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow." The next morning, I lay on the floor of the improvised infirmary and began the performance of my life. I closed my eyes and let my body relax completely, controlling my breathing so it became almost imperceptible. Dr. Rosen placed his hand on my neck, pretending to check for a pulse, then shook his head gravely to the German guard supervising. "Typhus. Died during the night." The guard approached and looked at me with disgust, but didn't touch. No one wanted to risk contracting the disease. He made a note in his notebook and gestured to two prisoners who worked removing bodies. Take her. Being carried like a corpse is an experience that disarms any mental preparation. The men grabbed me by the arms and legs, carelessly, as if I were a sack of potatoes. My head swayed from side to side as we walked, and I had to use all my concentration to keep my muscles relaxed and my eyes closed. They threw me on top of a pile of bodies that had already formed since the night before. The impact knocked the air from my lungs, but I managed to control the reflex to cough. I felt other bodies being placed on top of me, the weight gradually increasing until I could barely breathe. The first hour was the worst. My entire body ached because of the strange position, and the weight of the other bodies left me panicked. But after a while, I found a kind of rhythm. I breathed minimally, moved my toes to maintain circulation, and counted the sounds around me to keep my mind occupied. The guards passed by the location twice a day, once in the morning and once in the late afternoon. I memorized the schedule by the sounds. Marching boots, voices in German, sometimes a laugh that made my blood freeze. Between the guards' passes, I dared to open my eyes for a few seconds, check my surroundings, adjust my position. Anna Kowalski became my salvation. She was a political prisoner, a teacher from Warsaw who had been arrested for distributing anti-Nazi pamphlets. Anna worked in the kitchen and had access to small amounts of food. On the third day of my death, she began passing by the place where the bodies were kept, always carrying a bucket of dirty water that needed to be dumped in a nearby ditch. During these passes, she left small pieces of bread wrapped in cloth, hidden among the bodies. They were no more than crumbs, but they were enough to keep me alive. She also brought water, 1 spoon at a time, which I drank desperately when I was sure no one was looking. Anna never spoke to me during those first days. It was too risky. But I knew she was aware of what I was doing, and I knew that for some reason she had decided to help me. Maybe it was solidarity between women. Maybe it was just the desire to do something, anything, that was an act of resistance against the death machine that surrounded us. The first week was a constant nightmare. My body wasn't used to the immobility, the lack of food, the constant cold. I developed sores because of pressure from other bodies, and my skin turned gray from lack of circulation. Worse than the physical pain was the mental battle. There were moments when I just wanted to get up and walk to the guards, confess everything, accept whatever punishment came. But then I thought of Rebecca. I thought of the rag doll I still kept hidden in my clothes. I thought of the possibility, however small, that she was still alive somewhere, waiting for me to find her. It was an irrational thought, maybe even delusional, but it was all I had. On the 10th day, something happened that almost ended everything. A new group of prisoners arrived at the camp, and among them was a woman who screamed when she saw the piled bodies. She recognized someone, maybe a husband, maybe a son, and began trying to reach the body, fighting against the guards who tried to restrain her. In the confusion, one of the German guards decided to make a more rigorous check of the body pile. He began poking them with the tip of his boot, looking for any sign of life. When he got close to me, he stopped. I could feel his gaze burning through my closed eyelids. He crouched down and placed his hand on my neck, looking for a pulse. His hand was cold and rough, and I had to use all my willpower not to tremble. He stayed there for at least a minute, which seemed like hours, while I kept my breathing at absolute minimum. Finally, he moved away. But not before kicking my ribs, just to be sure. The pain was so intense I almost screamed, but I managed to transform the scream into a light sigh that could have come from any of the bodies around me. After that incident, Dr. Rosen managed to visit me during the night. He came pretending to make medical checks on the bodies, but was actually checking my health status. His biggest concern was that I would develop a real infection, that I would actually die before I could escape. "You're getting too weak," he whispered during one of those nightly visits. "I don't know if you can endure much more time like this." "I have to endure." "Why? Why are you doing this?" I showed him the rag doll I kept hidden against my chest. "Rebecca. My daughter." He examined the doll in the faint moonlight and then looked at me with an expression that mixed compassion and despair. "Esther, you know the chances of her being alive are." "Don't say it. You need to be realistic." "Realistic." I almost laughed, but the sound that came out was more of a hoarse moan. "I'm lying in the middle of corpses pretending to be dead for 10 days, and you want me to be realistic?" He remained silent for a moment. "What will you do when you can't endure anymore?" "I don't know." But that time hasn't come yet. The second week was when I really began to deteriorate. My skin was turning yellowish, and I could feel my body beginning to consume itself. The sores caused by pressure from other bodies had become infected, and I had a constant low fever that made me delirious sometimes. It was during one of those deliriums that I had the most vivid vision of Rebecca. She appeared beside me, still holding the doll, and sat on the edge of the pile of bodies as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Mama, why are you sleeping here?" "I'm waiting for you, my love." "But I'm here." "I know. Can you stay with me for a while?" She smiled and began singing a song I used to sing to her before bedtime. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, clear, sweet, full of life. When I woke from the delirium, my cheeks were wet with tears. Anna must have noticed I was getting worse, because she began taking more risks to help me. She started coming during the day, pretending to check if there was anything useful among the bodies that could be reused. During these visits, she managed to give me small amounts of water and, occasionally, a larger piece of bread. "You need to resist," she whispered while pretending to examine a body near mine. "There are rumors that something big is going to happen soon." "What?" "I can't talk now. But resist." On the 20th day, I discovered what Anna had meant. Rumors began circulating among prisoners about a possible rebellion. Some of the men who worked in the more isolated parts of the camp had managed to access some weapons, and were planning a mass escape attempt. The news gave me energy I hadn't felt in weeks. If there was a rebellion, there would be chaos. And in chaos, I could finally get out of the pile of bodies and try to escape. More importantly, I could look for Rebecca. But the rebellion didn't happen as planned. Someone denounced the plan, and the leaders were executed publicly on the morning of the 23rd day. The rest of us learned what had happened from the screams and gunshots that echoed through the camp. After the conspiracy was discovered, surveillance increased dramatically. Guards began making more frequent checks, and any suspicious behavior was punished immediately. Anna could no longer visit me as frequently, and Dr. Rosen completely stopped his nightly visits. I was completely alone. The following days were the most difficult of the entire experience. Without Anna's regular help, I could barely feed myself. My water came only from rain that sometimes fell during the night, which I collected by slightly opening my mouth. My body was consuming its own muscles to keep functioning. But the worst part wasn't hunger or thirst. It was absolute loneliness. Lying there, surrounded by the dead, I began to question my own sanity. There were moments when I couldn't remember why I was doing this. There were moments when Rebecca seemed more like a dream than a real memory. It was on the 30th day that I found the letter. It was in the pocket of a coat that had been placed over the pile of bodies the night before. When I managed to reach it, I saw it was addressed to my dear daughter. My first impulse was not to read it. It seemed like a violation of someone's privacy, even if that someone was dead. But I was desperate for any human connection, any reminder that the world still had love, still had hope. I opened the letter with trembling hands. "My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it means I couldn't return home as I promised. I want you to know that every day here I think of you. I think of your smile, your laugh, the way you wrinkle your nose when you're concentrating on something. I don't know what will happen to me here, but I know you are strong. Stronger than I ever was. No matter what happens, don't let them take that away from you. Don't let them make you forget who you are.
I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Papa."
I read the letter at least 10 times. Every word seemed written especially for me, as if the unknown father was speaking directly to my broken heart. I kept the letter with Rebecca's doll, against my chest, and it became my second source of strength. On the 35th day, something happened that changed everything. I was semi-conscious, floating between sleep and wakefulness, when I heard voices speaking in German very close to the pile of bodies. I recognized the voice of one of the senior officers, a man who rarely came to that section of the camp. Protocol change, immediate cremation, efficiency. My blood froze. They were changing the procedure. Instead of letting bodies accumulate for days, they were going to start cremating them immediately. If that happened, I would actually die the next time trucks came to collect the bodies. That night, when I was sure no one was around, I left the pile of bodies for the first time in more than a month. My muscles had atrophied so much I could barely stand. I walked like a shadow to the fence that separated our section from the rest of the camp, looking for some way to escape. That's when I saw Anna. She was on the other side of the fence, obviously waiting for me. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. Esther, my God, you are alive. I'm still alive. We need to get you out of here tonight. They changed the protocol. Tomorrow morning they're going to cremate all the bodies. She had cut a small hole in the fence, just big enough for a thin person to pass through. It took almost an hour for me to crawl through the opening, because my body was too weak to move easily. On the other side of the fence, Anna gave me clean clothes and a substantial piece of bread, more food than I had seen in weeks. Where are you going to hide me? In the laundry. There's a space between the machines where you can stay during the day. At night, I'll be able to bring more food. Moving from the pile of corpses to a hiding place in the laundry was like being resurrected. For the first time in more than a month, I could move, stretch, feel my own pulse without fear that someone would discover it. I cried with relief, but silently. Anna told me the situation in the camp was deteriorating rapidly. Rumors said the Soviets were approaching, and the Germans were desperate to accelerate the extermination process before being forced to evacuate. There are other hiding places, she told me. Small groups of people who manage to hide in different parts of the camp. Not many, but some. And children? Are there hidden children? Anna hesitated before answering. Some. Very few. It was the hope I needed. However small the chance, there was still the possibility that Rebecca was among those hidden children. I spent 5 more days hidden in the laundry, slowly recovering and planning my next move. Anna brought me news from outside. The Soviets were really approaching, and there were signs that the Germans would begin evacuating the camp soon. On the 41st day of my death, I made the decision to leave my hiding place to actively search for Rebecca. I knew it was risky, but I also knew that if the Germans evacuated the camp, I would lose my only chance to find her. Anna gave me a clean prisoner uniform and helped me blend in with a group of women who worked cleaning the empty barracks. For 3 days, I searched every corner of the camp I could access, looking for any sign of Rebecca or other hidden children. It was at the end of the 3rd day that I finally found her. She was hidden under a pile of straw in an abandoned barracks, along with 4 other children and an older woman who was taking care of them. When she saw me, Rebecca remained motionless for a moment, as if she were seeing a ghost.
Mama.
Yes, my love. It's me. She ran to me and threw herself into my arms, still holding the rag doll, which wasn't the same one I had found. That doll had belonged to another child, who had died and left the toy behind. My Rebecca had managed to keep hers during all that time. I knew you would find me, she whispered in my ear. I knew. We stayed hidden together for 2 more days, until the sound of Soviet artillery began echoing in the distance. The Germans began evacuating the camp on the morning of the 45th day, destroying evidence and executing prisoners who couldn't walk. Anna came to get us from the hiding place and guided us to a section of the fence that had been damaged during a bombing. It wasn't a dramatic escape, it was just a group of exhausted women and children walking through a hole in the fence during the confusion of evacuation. On the other side of the fence, there was a dense forest that stretched for kilometers. We walked for 2 days, eating roots and drinking water from streams, until we found a Soviet patrol. When the Soviet soldier asked my name, it took me a moment to answer. For 45 days, I had been a dead woman. Relearning to be alive took time. Esther Goldstein, I finally replied. And this is my daughter, Rebecca. Today, 75 years later, Rebecca has her own grandchildren. She became a doctor, specializing in childhood trauma. She says she wants to help children who have gone through difficult things, like she did. Sometimes she asks me how I managed to endure those 45 days among the dead. How I managed to maintain hope when everything around me was despair. I always give the same answer, because you were alive somewhere, and as long as you were alive, I needed to be too. But there's a part of the story I never told Rebecca, that I never told anyone until today. There's a part one kept just for myself during all these years, like a secret that's too heavy to share, but too important to forget. On the 37th day among the bodies, when I was at my lowest point, almost delirious with hunger and thirst, something happened that changed not only my perspective on those days, but on life itself. I was semi-conscious when I felt someone moving in the pile of bodies beside me. My first thought was panic. One of the corpses had come back to life, which meant I could be discovered. But when I managed to focus my vision, I saw it was a boy. He was maybe 10 years old, dark hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, and eyes that seemed too old for his young face. He was clearly alive, but pretending to be dead, exactly like me. When our eyes met, we both froze. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, each processing the fact that we weren't alone in this madness. Then he made an almost imperceptible gesture with his head, a small nod that meant, "I won't give you away if you don't give me away." His name was David. I discovered this during the almost inaudible whispers we exchanged during the following nights, when we were sure no one was around. He had lost his parents on the first day at the camp and managed to hide among the bodies by pure survival instinct. David had been doing this longer than me, almost 2 months. He had developed an elaborate system to get water and food, taking advantage of the fact that his young appearance made some guards lower their guard around him, thinking he was just another child's corpse. But David was dying. I could see it, even in the darkness. His breathing was becoming more labored each day, and his body was consuming itself faster than mine. He had endured for so long that his organism simply couldn't continue anymore. "I have a sister," he whispered to me on a particularly cold night. "Sarah. She's 6 years old. She was with me when we arrived, but they separated us. Where is she now? I don't know. I hope she managed to hide somewhere too." David died on the night of the 39th day. He simply stopped breathing beside me, transforming from a child pretending to be dead into a child who was actually dead. There was no drama, no last words. Just silence where before there had been the almost imperceptible sound of his breathing. I stayed beside his body for 2 whole days, whispering stories I used to tell Rebecca, quietly singing the lullabies she liked. It was the only way I found to honor that brave boy who had survived so long just by force of will. When I finally managed to escape from the pile of bodies and found Rebecca, the first thing I did was ask if she knew a girl named Sarah. "Sarah? Sarah what?" "I don't know the last name. She's 6 years old, dark hair, had an older brother named David." Rebecca's eyes lit up with recognition. "Sarah Brenner. She was in my group when we arrived. But I don't know where she is now." I spent the rest of my time at the camp looking for Sarah Brenner. I searched in every hiding place I could access, asked every person I met. I never found her. For decades, this search became a silent obsession. After the war, when we managed to reach America, I scoured survivor lists, contacted refugee aid organizations, maintained correspondence with other survivors hoping to find some clue about what had happened to Sarah Brenner. I never found anything. 15 years ago, when Rebecca was organizing my papers for an interview with a Holocaust oral history project, she found all the letters, all the lists, all the documents related to my search for Sarah. "Mom, who is Sarah Brenner?" That's when I told her about David. About the days we spent together among the bodies, about how he died beside me, about the silent promise I made to look for his sister. Rebecca cried when I finished the story. Then she remained silent for a long time, processing everything I had told her. "You never gave up searching," she finally said. "I couldn't give up. David didn't give up on me when he found me there. I couldn't give up on his sister." 3 years ago, at 93 years old, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was a woman with an American accent, but who spoke with the careful rhythm of someone who learned English as a second language. "My name is Sarah Brenner Goldman. I'm looking for information about my brother David Brenner, who died at Sobibor in 1943. My heart stopped. It literally stopped for a few seconds before racing so fast I thought I would have a heart attack. "Sarah." "Yes. Someone told me you might have known my brother." Sarah had survived. She had been hidden by a Polish Christian family who lived near the camp, people who risked their own lives to save a Jewish child. After the war, she was adopted by an American family and grew up believing David had died in the first days at the camp. Only recently, when she began researching her own history for her grandchildren, did she discover through camp records that David had survived for a few months, and that maybe someone knew more details about his last days. We met at a cafe in New York on a sunny spring morning. Sarah is 86 now, completely white hair, but the same dark eyes I imagined David would have had if he had grown up. I told her about her brother. About his courage, about how he survived for so long, about the last conversations we had. I told her he died thinking of her, hoping she was safe somewhere. She cried, of course. But she also smiled. "He was always protective of me," she said. "Even when we were little, before the war. Always said he would take care of me, no matter what happened. He did that, I replied. Until the end, he worried about you. Sarah gave me a photo she had kept all these years, a family photo taken before the war, where she and David appear playing in the yard of the house where they lived. David was smiling, with his arms around his little sister, protecting her even in play. Looking at that photo, I finally understood why I had managed to survive those 45 days among the dead. It wasn't just for Rebecca, though she was my main strength. It was also for David, for Sarah, for all the children who didn't have the chance to grow up, to become adults, to have their own families. I survived because someone needed to tell their stories. Someone needed to remember that they existed, that they fought, that they loved and were loved even in the midst of the worst horror humanity can create. Rebecca is here with me now, as I record this story. She's 78 years old, but still wrinkles her nose when she's concentrating, exactly like she did as a child. Her own children and grandchildren are scattered around the world, living full and safe lives that David and Sarah could never have. Sometimes they ask me if I feel anger. Anger at the Germans, anger at God, anger at the world that allowed it to happen. The answer is complicated. Yes, I feel anger. But it's not an anger that consumes, that destroys. It's an anger that protects, that remembers, that says never again every time I see injustice in the world. Anger keeps me vigilant. Love keeps me human. And between anger and love, between the death I pretended and the life I managed to keep, there's a very simple truth. Survival isn't just about keeping your heart beating. It's about keeping alive the flame of what makes us human, even when the entire world seems to be trying to extinguish it. 45 days pretending to be dead taught me that being alive is a choice we make every moment. It's a choice I made lying among corpses, that David made until his last breath, that Sarah made even when she was too young to fully understand what was happening. It's a choice all of us make every day, in small and big ways. We choose to be alive when we decide to love despite the pain. We choose to be alive when we decide to help despite the risk. We choose to be alive when we decide to remember despite the weight of memories. We choose to be alive when we decide to tell our stories, even when they're difficult to hear. This is my story. It's a story about death, but it's mainly a story about life. About choosing life, every day, every moment, even when, especially when, it seems impossible. Rebecca takes my hand as I finish speaking. Her skin is warm, alive, real. The rag doll she carried during those terrible days is in a display case in our living room, along with the letter I found in that dead man's coat pocket, along with a photo of David and Sarah playing in the yard. They are memories of a time we would prefer to forget, but that we must not forget. Because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to tell. Someone needs to stay alive so their stories don't die. And today, in this moment, as the sun comes through the window and warms my 96-year-old face, I choose to be alive. Once more.